Hey guys, and welcome to our live stream of our In Her Financial Shoes podcast. We're having a few technical difficulties today, so just bear with me 10 seconds. I'm just going to load this live stream up from my phone, and I just want to check that I don't sound like a Dalek. So 10 seconds. I'm just going to load this live stream up from my phone. Okay, it's all sounding good from my phone. So we're going to assume that the tech issues are temporary and all is good in the world.
Excellent stuff. Excellent.
The joys of podcasting, the joys. I was just saying to Lucienne, who's my guest today, who I'll introduce you to in a second, I've just packed up like most of my office last weekend because we're moving to Jersey in 2 weeks. So I was like, is it because I moved my pop shield? Like, what's going on? Anyway, we should all be good. So welcome to today's episode of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. I am so delighted to introduce you to our very special guest today, Lucienne Shakir. Lucienne was a client of mine. I hope you don't mind me sharing that, Lucienne.
No,
was a client of mine in actually quite the early days of my business, and we met in her cupboard at school. She was teaching, and on her lunch breaks, we would have her coaching sessions. And I'll always remember the days of you being, kind of sort of stuck in your stationery cupboard. And, you were literally at the start of your journey, Lucienne, when we started working together. So it's so wonderful now to invite Lucienne back. She is also a podcaster herself, of an incredible podcast that she launched this year called That's What She Said. And she's already interviewed some incredible global entrepreneurs and inspiring guests. So I'm really excited today to introduce Lucienne to talk about a subject around stress and burnout. And this is a really important subject for me, particularly if any of you are listening to this or watching it live, as we're streaming this live today, about how do we avoid stress and burnout? How do we actually know we're maybe in stress or burnout when we're growing our businesses? So a massive welcome, Lucienne, to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the lovely introduction. You took me right back to that little room, that little dark room, and my goodness me, what a difference the last couple of years has been. It's incredible to be here, and I love In Her Financial Shoes. So thank you for having me on. It's brilliant. It's amazing.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. And listen, so tell our audience a little bit about how you've gone on to go from working in a school to becoming a female empowerment specialist. Just talk us through that journey over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, it's been probably about 5 years now, and it's fascinating because I was in education for about 12 to 13 years, and a big part of that was mentorship and coaching. And I was a sixth form tutor for most of my professional life in a school, and I climbed the ladder very, very quickly. I made it up to middle leadership very quickly, and then progressed from there. And I think sometimes when I think back to that, I didn't really have the foundations underneath me to support me in that growth. And also the environment that I was in wasn't particularly supportive to young talent, fresh talent. And I think, the school was an incredible school, the last school that I worked in, but I'd always been very aspirational, really aspirational. And I wanted to change the education system. I wanted to move away from data and numbers and come a bit back more to the human being in the classroom, and ended up just really frustrated actually that things weren't planning out as I'd imagined. And so, yeah, I decided that it was no longer for me, which was a real heartache. I was waking up each day, and the alignment with my values of empowerment. I didn't know that it was female empowerment at the time, and I'm for empowerment of everybody. I'm just especially passionate about closing the gender divide in many of the countries around the world. And I was going into school, and I was feeling sad to be going to work. And that's something I'd never experienced before as a workaholic. And I never stay anywhere where I'm unhappy. You know, I left a marriage where I was unhappy. There was nothing deeply wrong in the marriage, but I was unhappy, and I'm not prepared to stay somewhere where I'm unhappy. So I handed in my notice, and I had about 7 or 8 months where I could plan what I was going to do. No savings in the bank, would be relying very much just on whatever it was I created. And I asked around for a financial coach, and you were mentioned, and I hired you. And with you, I began the process of really understanding my financial situation, and that process of setting up your own business, which can be a really scary and daunting thing to do, because, you know, it's new, and education is like, it's the most institutionalized world ever. So, you know, going out there and doing it on your own was completely different to anything I'd experienced before. So you were the first coach that I worked with in that, you know, business coaching / entrepreneurship and moving into that, understanding my finances. And it was a remarkable few months, because it opened my eyes to what really was possible, which changed my perspective completely. So yeah, thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind. And when you talk about that time, Lucienne, there's going to be a few people listening to this that are going to really resonate with this. Like, they maybe feel stuck. They're trying to get into the entrepreneurial space, or maybe they don't feel aligned with what they're doing anymore from what you were describing. What was holding you, or first of all, was there anything that was holding you back in that period? And if so, what did that look like for you?
Really good question. So when my son was, just after my son was born, I had a nervous breakdown. So that was about 10 years ago. And I did a lot of work on my myself at that time. I spent a year bedbound. You know, it was I had help taking me to the toilet, like that was how awful it was. And it'd been an accumulation of years of all sorts of issues and problems, and then obviously having my child, it really compounded the stress and the anxiety that I'd felt around my identity and being this aspirational woman that I was. I recovered from that, and I went back into education, and I think the main thing that held me back from making a move sooner was the fact that I was hopeful that the answer was earning a living through doing something good that meant something. Education is something that means something. You know, you can really impact people through that. And I was worried that I couldn't create that for myself. I knew that I kind of wanted to create my own school one day. All of my previous head teachers had said to me, "You're going to be a head teacher one day." You know, they were absolutely backing me. And, you know, I'm still really well connected with, you know, from the olden days when I was first teaching, those heads who really were in my corner. And I investigated setting up my own school and doing all of that. But I was like, I can't, who am I? Who am I to set up my own school? You know, and there's all these people around me who are older, who are more experienced, okay, might not have had the academic acclaim that I'd worked through. I had a master's in education, and I was beginning a PhD in coaching and mentoring, but I was doing that for external validation because I wasn't getting it where I needed it. So what was holding me back was this safety net of, this is a value-driven thing. You can impact people's lives in education, and it's a worthy thing for you to be doing. It's a noble way of you earning money. And I had this idea of, I don't think I classed myself as an entrepreneur until about 8 or 9 months ago. Like, that's how recent it's been. Because for a long time, earning my own money, aspiring for wealth, being financially, you know, abundant was greed. It was greed, an excess of money that was over and above what we needed to live a healthy and happy life was greedy. And who was I to live that kind of life? So I definitely had aspirations, but it was all tied in with the label of what I was doing professionally and who externally could give me that label rather than what I could create for myself. It's scary. Setting up your own business is really scary. And in the end, the only reason that it really happened was because I've just had enough. You know, if I hadn't have had a nervous breakdown 10 years ago, when it got to the point where I'd had enough in my last school, it would have continued until I had a nervous breakdown.
Wow.
So it's knowing that, knowing your mind, knowing how your mind is working, and saying to yourself, right, if I stay here, I'm going to end up back in that place. And what's more important, being alive or having a secure income? It's being alive for my son and for me and for my friends and my family. So there was no question, and I had to do something about it. So yeah, it's a rather long answer, Catherine, sorry.
Oh, so much like juiciness in that answer I want to pick up on. Actually, the first thing was, what was really powerful in what you said was, who am I? Because I think there are so many, I feel quite emotional actually, even just talking about this. There's so many of us women that whether we have families or not, you know, we lose this sense of identity, who we are. And I kind of want to ask you really, how did you understand who you are?
Yeah, that's a question and a half, because I'm not sure I even know really still who I am. I think it's a progressive journey that we go on. What I do know now that I didn't believe before, that I didn't know about myself before, is that I am kind, that I care, and that I am worthy of love. Yeah. And those are all things that I didn't believe about myself before I started this personal development journey. Personal development was a whole new world to me. And it's interesting actually, because my coaching model is all around the sense of self. So I have all of the different selves, and we look at how all of the different selves work. And I think it was almost a self-therapy that I created for understanding who I was. Who was I on the podcast with Catherine? You know, it's very easy. I mean, you came on my podcast. It's very easy for me to put you up here, you know, the person that coached me when I first started, and put you on a pedestal and look up to you and regard you as somebody that I could never possibly be as successful as. But I know that aligning my identity against another human being is really unhealthy, really, really unhealthy. And I think biologically speaking, I say this a lot, we're no more advanced than our biology. Like the chimp is going to kick in and go, oh my God, she's amazing. How can I possibly ever do something like her? I mean, I remember when I started my podcast, one of the thoughts that I had, it didn't pertain to you specifically, but other female entrepreneurs that I know really well, it's like, oh, they're going to think I'm ripping them off. Like I'm doing a podcast. I can't do a podcast. They do a podcast. You know, so again, who am I to be doing the things that these other women are doing? And actually what's happened through this self-work and through understanding my sense of self and understanding that I'm never going to be a fully formed, put a bow on the parcel and say, right, this is who she is. I need to harness the fact that I'm different, that everybody's different, that we all have differences that are really, really vital for community and for, you know, for growth and for growing. But for such a long time, my identity was the lens through which other people saw me. And I call that the ought self, the OUGHT self. And I think that women, I think you touch on a really important point there. I think that a lot of women, especially in the research that I've done, between the ages of about early 30s to late 40s, their notion of self and the anxiety, stress, depression that comes from that is formed from what we believe other people think of us.
It's perception, isn't it? It's all perception in experiences that we've had, which is why you could send two people on the same holiday with the same suitcase, eat the same food, have the same experiences, but yet they come back with different perceptions of that experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what can happen is you can point the finger at other people, right? And say, this person isn't kind enough to me. This person doesn't give me enough of their time on this, that, and the other. But it's all in your head. It's all about you. So I think that the clearest way that I can say about finding myself and my identity is knowing that we are never fully formed. We are always growing, and it's our duty actually to be learning to understand ourselves and being kind with ourselves in the process, because we're not just mothers, we're not just business owners. We don't have to be one or the other or dualistic. We can be many, 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 many things, and that's okay. And I think when I realized that I was never going to be able to pin myself down as this is who Lucienne is, it just freed me up completely. And that's just been phenomenal, really.
And that freedom is interesting, isn't it? A lot of people use this word freedom, like freedom of time, freedom of money. But actually what I love about this conversation is it almost opens up this freedom of identity, of self-awareness of who we are, because as you say, we get to choose how we respond to other people's perceptions. We get to choose how we respond to other people's opinions, or, you know, and I mean, just this week, I won't be specific with the example because I wouldn't want to upset anybody. But somebody has responded in a way that has really upset me this week. And I sat there and thought, I can get really upset about this and start, you know, passing comments on them as a person. And then I thought, no, because they're choosing their own behaviors. They're choosing how they respond. And I get to choose how I respond too. And I think in the whole topic of stress and pressure and identity, acknowledging that for ourselves, that we get to choose, but finding ourselves is a journey. That's what I've kind of gathered from what you said there in your story, Lucienne, that there's no perfect wrap this parcel up and put a bow on the top and say, this is who I am. Actually, I'm going to learn and discover who I am through my journey.
Yeah, and you're right about that choice. We can choose to create our identity through how we think others see us, or we can choose to create who we are from within. And really, you know, that real growth, that real self-care, that real kindness to yourself comes from when you allow yourself to be who you are within, without that veneer of perfection that you think everybody else is expecting from you. And working with high performance women, you know, who are in male dominated industries, quite often historically those women have tried to fit more into the male persona, perhaps become a bit more masculine or a bit more male in how they manage and how they lead. And what we're finding is that hasn't really helped anybody. We're seeing now a lot of studies around where we've got a lot of diversity on corporate boards, where women are allowed to be themselves, where men are allowed to be emotional, where you're allowed to lean into conflict and have deep conversation that isn't just surface level numbers, KPIs, etc. It's like, right, how are we doing as human beings? How are we getting on? It's allowed that emotional intelligence of women to really shine through, and has increased the profit of so many of those businesses, because that emotional awareness is really important. And I think the more we work on those relationships with how we think other people see us, and move away from that and just ask ourselves, how do I need to show up for myself the happier we will all be, to be honest.
When you talk about the emotional awareness, one of the things that we talked about on your podcast when you interviewed me was our cycles, like our physical and emotional cycles. And tell us a little bit about how important is that, and how does that help to support us by understanding how our cycles affect our energy levels and those kind of things?
Yeah, it's amazing, and I love talking about this, because can you imagine me, Catherine, like with 12 men around a board table and them asking me about how do they keep female talent? Why is the female talent leaving the corporation, etc.? And I'm like, what do you know about the female menstrual cycle? What do you know about high performance in women? And they're all looking at one another and like, well, we can't talk about that. I'm like, yes, you can. You absolutely can.
I think sometimes as well, though, is that we can make some assumptions, sometimes generalizations of men, and I think that there are a lot of men that really want to learn, but we don't talk about it either as women. Even between us, we don't talk about this.
Absolutely. So I can say that because I've been in those situations where I have, I've had to open that can of worms and say, right, these conversations do need to happen, and we need to have more women around the table to explain their experience. And it's all about the culture that's created in those rooms that allows people to be able to share openly. What we're seeing is a massive increase in sport is a great example. So when you look at some of the head coaches in the world when it comes to sport, they are beginning in the last maybe 8 or 9 years, and that's how recent this is, to really work with the female athlete cycles. Now that sounds incredible that it's only within the last decade that we've really started to look at this. But when you are talking about high performance as a female, if you don't know what your cycle is, if you haven't taken the time, this sounds so clinical and awful, but if you haven't taken the time to get executive about what's going on in your cycle and at what times in the month you can expect to really not want to speak to anyone, like not want to be communicative, and not be scheduling podcast recording days to do that, days where
when in the month for you does that happen, out of interest? Is it like pre-cycle, post-cycle?
Okay, so it's different for everyone. However, Maisie Hill is an excellent person to look up for this. She's written an amazing book called Period Power, and she talks about seasons within your period. So you have a summer, a spring, autumn and winter, and there are traits that tend to be general. And we call it summer, we really want to, we're out there, the winter where we want to come back and be within ourselves. And that all comes to pre-ovulation and post-ovulation. And when we're ovulating, those hormones create more symmetry in our faces and allow us to be a bit more energetic and bubbly. So waitresses get tipped more when they're ovulating than when they don't. Yeah. So this is something that she talks about in her book. But these hormonal fluctuations, so we're governed completely by hormones as human beings. These drastic and massive hormone fluctuations are a really important part of understanding our performance as women. And so one of the first thing that anybody working with me has to do is read Period Power by Maisie Hill, and has to start tracking their cycle as well, because that knowledge, that education is key to understanding, right, if you're a keynote speaker and you're the kind of person, who is world famous, people pay a lot of money for you to be on their stage. Well, is it a time when you're really going to shine? Is that booked in where you're due to be in your summer or in your spring? And what impact is that going to have on the people who are watching you, and whether or not they follow you? And, this is where we have to get, I'll say it again, really executive about understanding what our monthly cycle is. And if we don't have a monthly cycle, being really executive about logging what's going on each day and seeing if there is a pattern. But I'm seeing this in so I work with a lot of male dominated industries, and this conversation is happening more and more, and I'm so happy about that. Menopause, we've got more menopausal women working in the working world than we have ever had in the history of humankind.
Do men have cycles, energy cycles, like women do?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. I know that when I was pregnant, I think I've really felt like my husband definitely went through hormonal changes. And I know that there's new evidence around this hopeful effervescence that happens within your cells when you exercise with people. And I was listening to someone talking about that the other day. And so it wouldn't be ridiculous to think that men are either impacted by the cycles of women or have their own natural cycles. I don't know the answer.
It's I mean, I have the book that Lucienne is referring to. In fact, Lucienne posted the book to me after our podcast interview. It's still sitting on my desk of books to read. I've got about 6 at the moment that I'm working my way through. But one of the things I did do last year actually is I grabbed a magic chart. For those of you that follow me will know how much I love magic charts. They're like these big pieces of clean film that you stick on your wall like a whiteboard. And I literally just grabbed one of those and I just split it into 31 squares. And I just tracked my energy cycles. And I tracked, at what times of the month I was really high on energy, when I was low on energy. And it does really help from a business perspective, high performance, when you're thinking of batching your content, for example. You might have a recording day where you do 3 or 4 or 5 podcast interviews back to back rather than splitting them throughout the month. So it definitely had a huge impact on my ability to plan in my business so that I could make sure that I'm, recording podcasts, for example, when I'm at the peak of my energy cycles rather than, maybe when I need to go and hibernate.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's those times where you just don't want to be around people, and everything irritates you. And it's just so frustrating for them and for you as well. And, if you're planning a family day with everyone on that day, and, you can get it down to that level of knowledge is no, we're not going to plan a day out by the seaside on that day, because I know for a fact that I'm just going to have a really pessimistic lens on the world on that day, because my progesterone is going to be really dipping at that time and my estrogen is going to be really low. So yeah, I mean, some people do laugh about it, but actually the people who are taking it very seriously are those global organizations and especially within sport as well. And it's becoming a really important thing. And coming back to the title of this, in terms of stress and how we cope with stress, there will be times during the months where you're not as good at being resilient when it comes to stressful situations. And when you know that might be because of where you're at on your cycle and what the hormones are doing in your body, you can actually be a little bit kinder to yourself about that and give yourself a bit of a break, because we are so good at being unkind to ourselves and not giving ourselves a break and feeling guilty for the way that we feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming back to that title, Lucienne, about living a high performance life without the stress and the pressure. Is there anything else that, from your experience and your expertise and helping guide high performing women and leaders through their businesses, are there any other obvious signs or anything to be aware of when it comes to stress or burnout?
It's a great question. And there will be signs in everybody that things aren't working as well as they need to be working. I love the analogy of a bucket that drips serotonin out of the bottom of the bucket, and your body can make a certain amount of the hormones required to deal with stress that the body goes through. And the body and the mind are one thing, right? In my opinion, your body is not separate from what goes on in your mind. Consciousness is all around biology as well. And so every time you need some of that serotonin when you're dealing with a stressful situation, a little bit is released from that bucket. It's dripping out, and if you need more, it drips out more, but your body can only make so much. So the reservoir needs to be created and needs to be filled, and that's what a lot of antidepressants do. They create a synthetic form of that hormone which refills the reservoir, but then the body gets a little bit lazy about making it organically, and it relies on the tablets, which is why there's so much difficulty when you're coming off and on medication. And I've been on and off medication for years, so I really know this very, very well. And what you will notice is that when you are going through particularly stressful situations, there will be times in your life when you deal with it really, really well, and there'll be times when you just find it very difficult. So one of the most stressful things that you can go through is moving house. There's like a list of in order of stresses, and one of them right up there, apart from a marriage breaking down or, you know, having a child, etc., is moving house. Is a really stressful thing to do.
That'll be me in 2 weeks' time then.
Are you moving on a particular date in your cycle, Catherine? Do you need to make sure that you're not?
Actually, that's interesting. So yes, I'm literally moving in the week of my winter week.
Okay. I love it. So yeah, that moving house is incredibly stressful. However, if you haven't been using up all of your stress reserves for stuff that you're doing, then you will find it a little easier than if you are quite depleted on what you need to achieve that, and you might find it a lot more difficult. So there might be times in your life where moving house is just horrendous, but there might be times in your life when it's a really amazing experience and you've got that energy. And what's fascinating for me personally, and I can give you a few references to people that I've worked with anonymously, of course, but when I had my nervous breakdown, I'm a very musical person. I love music. I play a lot of music. I love going and watching live music. I couldn't listen to music. I just couldn't. It was like white noise. It was too much of a sensory overload in my mind, made me very emotional. And so what I know now is if I don't want to listen to music, if I am a little bit discombobulated when music is playing and I'm not enjoying it, if Beyonce comes on and I'm not like having a little wiggle or a dance, I know that there's something not quite right, that I am definitely using up my reserves for whatever reason. And other people will have their other tells. So we call it a tell, a sign that they are close to going, I can't cope with this anymore. I just need to go to bed for a day or for a weekend. I want to get away from everybody, something that I hear a lot. I just need to escape. And initially that I just need to escape can be, I just really want to get away for a weekend on my own without the family. Again, traditionally not something that a lot of women do, but we're seeing it happen a lot more now. I love a weekend away on my own. I absolutely love it. That can become, if it's not dealt with and not worked on, I want to leave. That's it. I don't want this anymore, whether that's life, whether that's your marriage, whether that's your children. And so there are lots and lots of different stages. But when you've been at the very, very bottom, it's easy to see what those signs are. It's a lot more difficult if you haven't faced that burnout. So what I would ask anybody is like, how often are you saying to yourself, I just need to get away. I just need some time to myself. It would be because you haven't prioritized self-care. You haven't prioritized, really resting. And when I say resting, not lying in bed, scrolling on your screen, watching Netflix, which, I'm guilty of doing as well. But resting being on your own, perhaps reading, doesn't require too much mental stimulation, maybe looking out of the window, sitting by the seaside, which you're going to be doing a lot of, those things which replenish rather than drain our resources. Things clients have said to me, I can't drink tea or coffee. when I know things are going downhill, when I stop drinking tea or coffee, when they start overeating, when they're very emotional, crying a lot of the time. Another client of mine knows if she doesn't want to brush her teeth, that she's really struggling. So we do have tells, but it's catching them before we get to the point of breakdown that is really important. And so just ask yourself, are you saying I just want to disappear? And if you are, and you just want a weekend away, have a weekend away. Go away for a weekend. Collect yourself. Book yourself into a spa. You don't have to apologize to anyone. Do it. Communicate it with your family, but do it. Because if you don't do it for long enough, it will wear you down.
Yeah, and that takes me back actually to earlier this year on the podcast. We had a guest called Dr. Joanna Martin, and Dr. Joanna Martin runs a retreat program called One of Many. And on one of their retreats, it's called Be Love, and it's all about expressing self-love and boundaries and energy cycles and all of what we're talking about today. And I remember us having a conversation about like replenishment. And if you feel like you need to just take yourself away for, even if it's an hour, even if, if you're a single mom and you have no family around you to help out, having an hour to yourself, but telling your friends, like, I'm going in, like, check on me in an hour. And if I don't resurface, like, just message me. But it is really important to be able to have that time to reconnect back in with our identity, who we are, our sense of self. What boundaries do we need to have to feel like in balance? Because that's really what it's about, isn't it? It's about how do we create that sense of balance where we're not tipping. And I like that bucket analogy. We're in a nice, happy space where we feel regulated. And it's when we get dysregulated that everything becomes problematic. And certainly from a financial perspective, that's really interesting to think about. What time of the month are you looking at your finances? Are you doing it at a time when you're regulated, when you're not fretting, or you just had an argument with somebody, or you've had a stressful day at work? This is why I talk about having a money day on a Sunday morning, because Sunday mornings typically are that nice time, when, certainly in this country anyway, it's cold outside and we can wrap up in a nice blanket in our pajamas, have a cup of tea, light a candle, just create that nice atmosphere for ourselves, which makes the whole conversation about money then less stressful with ourselves. Did you find going through that process when you dealt with your finances, Lucienne, at the start of that journey, did you find anything in particular that really helped you to feel regulated around money and that conversation?
Yeah, so something that I've always taken away from that was look at it. Like, look at it, don't ignore it, look at it, because it's easy to run away from looking at it. And I think, we're not well enough educated as youngsters about finances. And I think it can become, in England especially, it's quite taboo to talk about money. And look at it, talk about it, communicate with it, get it open, get intrigued, get interested in, pardon the pun, get interested in your money. And, yeah, it was a bit tenuous, but we got there. And I find myself slipping out of that sometimes. I just don't want to look at it, and I'm like, what am I avoiding? I ask myself, what am I avoiding? And I'll fill my time with other things rather than looking at it. And I'm like, no, I have a responsibility here. I'm a grown woman. I need to look at my finances, even though I don't feel like I have to. I need to do it regularly.
And it's the meaning, isn't it? Like, I don't think it's money itself that's the taboo. It's the meaning that we attach to money that is the taboo. So if that meaning is guilt or shame or fear or judgment, or even just hearing you say that word responsibility, I know for a lot of people, they don't want to take the responsibility because maybe they grew up in a household where there was irresponsibility around them. Or they could go in the opposite direction. So it's the meaning that we attach to money, not money itself, that's the taboo subject.
I learned that as well. I mean, that was that was really interesting when you were asking me about what money meant to me, and we explored. I think that was the first time where I realized that, you know, my English and my German family just had completely different ideas about what money was, and I'd grown up with this mishmash of two very like polar opposite understandings of money. And making every pound count, like really knowing, giving each pound a job is something that I always remember, and paying yourself first. I think that was a big one, which obviously, you know, that's Rich Dad Poor Dad was a real eye-opener, and you introducing me to that. You pay yourself first and then the rest will follow. And I think that was really powerful, especially for somebody starting out on their business journey, because you want to pay everything and everyone else first and then pay yourself.
And you're getting a salary every month, and you don't even have to think about paying yourself because somebody else has paid you for however many years you've been in the employed space, I guess. So it's a big mindset shift.
Yeah, lots of those things that I've kept with me that were really, really valuable. And it's fascinating because I do find with a lot of my clients as well that money is a massive stress factor. Like huge burden around money, education, and the significance of what money means. And so, what you do is absolutely fundamental to the health of you know, people, basically women and men, everyone. We all need to get a bit more savvy about money matters, I think.
Yeah, so much synergy there, so much alignment between, you know, the conversations we've been having today and the conversations around, you know, your area of expertise, Lucienne, with, you know, helping female empowerment. You know, it's such an incredible space you're working in. And for anyone who is wanting to kind of get some further support with growing their businesses and stepping into that leadership and that empowerment piece, I know, Lucienne, you're very shortly about to open up the doors for your collective membership. Tell us a little bit about that, and how can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Thank you so much. So yes, it was created out of necessity last year with one-to-ones. You know, there's only one of me, and one-to-one coaching isn't cheap. It's a real investment, and what I wanted to do was provide something that was affordable, but still, you know, you still had enough skin in the game to want to like really harness the value that was in the community. So we did a 10-month trial of a membership, and it was a massive success. And so we're opening the doors again in September. It's called the Collective of Extraordinary Women, and it gives access to people to group coaching, to we have expert speakers like yourself coming in and giving guidance on all sorts of stuff, guest speakers, masterclasses from me, so the stuff that I've learned over the last few years and I continue to learn within a community where you can ask for help. And it's so exciting, and the wait list is currently building, so it's lovely. Doors open in September, and registration will be just before September. Thanks for
how do we get on the wait list? Is it on your website, Lucienne?
Yeah, go and visit the website, click on membership, and there's a join the wait list. And in the meantime, we'll provide you with some stuff to get you going, to get you prepared for September. You can listen to the podcast. Catherine's on the podcast. That was a great episode. Absolutely loved that. That's coming out, I think, next week, actually, which is very exciting.
I'll put a link in the show notes. We can do a cross promotion.
But the collective you can find that on the website.
Great. Awesome. Well, I'll pop all those links in the show notes for anybody who's interested in finding out a bit more about stepping into that empowerment piece. Just such a good subject. And I just want to say, Lucienne, I think what you're doing is incredible work, and just seeing you through the last 5 years of your journey is just really, really inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing some of that with our listeners today on the In Her Financial Shoes podcast.
Thank you. I love every minute that I spend with you, Catherine. So thanks so much for having me on. It's been brilliant. It's been lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. Speak soon, guys. Lovely to see you all. See you soon.